Okay, let's unpack this. If you open a newspaper right now, or doom scroll through social media, or, listen to pretty much any political debate happening anywhere in the world, there's this one word that just, it dominates the conversation. It's the monster under the bed. It's the driving force of every campaign. It's this statistic that launches, I don't know, 1,000 think pieces every single week. Inequality.
It's the defining economic anxiety of our time. I mean, it really is the water we're swimming in.
It really is. And the general consensus, let's call it conventional wisdom, is that inequality is just inherently structurally bad. The narrative is always the same. The gap between the rich and the poor is the root of all evil. It's tearing society apart. And the primary goal of any just society should be to flatten that curve, to make things more equal. But today, we're diving into a source that says, wait a minute, hold on, put down the pitchforks for a second. We are having the entirely wrong conversation.
It's a provocative stance, to say the least. We're looking at Chapter 7 of Nassim Nicholas Taleb's work, specifically the chapter titled Inequality and Skin in the Game.
Right.
And what makes this deep dive so fascinating is that Taleb isn't arguing that inequality doesn't exist. He's not saying, everything's is fine, go back to sleep.
No.
He's arguing that we're chemically misidentifying the poison.
That's a great way to put it. So the argument isn't about how much money someone has compared to you. It's about how they got it, and maybe more importantly, what risks they took to get it.
Exactly.
This is the whole concept of skin in the game, which is the title of his broader work. But applying it to inequality, well, it changes everything.
It does. And this is where we have to shift our thinking from a standard political debate, left versus right, high taxes versus low taxes, all that.
Yeah, redistribution versus free market.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have to move to a structural analysis. We need to look at the physics of risk and fairness. So I guess the mission for this deep dive is to answer a very simple, very human question that I think everyone has felt at some point.
Okay, what is it?
Why do we tolerate, maybe even love, some billionaires while we absolutely despise certain bureaucrats or corporate managers who make a fraction of that money?
It's so true. I was thinking about this while I was reading the source material. People will buy posters of Einstein. They'll line up for hours. They'll pay hundreds of dollars to see a concert by some wealthy rock star or a famous DJ. But then they seethe with this actual rage when they hear about a CEO getting a bonus or a politician getting a speaking fee.
Right.
And Taleb argues this isn't hypocrisy. It's not that people are stupid. It's that we have this highly sophisticated, almost instinctual detection system for fairness.
We do. And the core thesis here, it isn't about everyone having the same bank balance at the same time. That's what he calls static equality. And as we'll see, it's actually a trap.
So what's the alternative?
True equality is about ergodicity.
Ergodicity. Now that is a $5 word. I feel like we need to put a pin in that because when I first read it, my eyes kind of glazed over.
We'll get there.
But we are going to break that down later because it seems to be the key to the whole math of fairness. But for now, essentially, it's about dynamic equality. The probability of moving between economic classes over your lifetime, right?
Precisely. And the filter, the thing that determines whether a system is fair or toxic. It is the presence or absence of risk.
Skin in the game.
Skin in the game. If the wealthy have it, if they can lose their status just as easily as they gained it, then inequality can be healthy. If they're protected from risk, that is when the system rots.
Okay, so let's jump into this first big idea then. The difference between tolerable and intolerable inequality. Taleb divides the rich into two camps, basically.
Right. Those we are fans of and those we resent.
So I want to get specific here. When we say fans, who are we actually talking about?
Let's look at this fan factor. Taleb lists people who have significantly more standing than the average person. He mentions Einstein, Michelangelo, or even the reclusive mathematician Grisha Perelman.
Okay, so geniuses.
Geniuses, but also entrepreneurs, artists, soldiers, heroes. He even throws in Bob Dylan.
Or Socrates.
Yeah.
Or a local celebrity chef that everyone loves. Or Marcus Aurelius. These are people who have what he calls a surplus. They have more talent, more money, more fame than I will ever have.
Sure.
But when I look at a picture of Michelangelo's David, or when I listen to Bob Dylan, I don't feel angry. I don't feel like they've stolen something from me.
Generally, no. You acknowledge their surplus. You might want to be them. You might aspire to imitate them, but you don't resent them. You are, in his words, a fan.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the experience of going to a stadium concert. You're there with 50,000 other people. The artist on stage is worth, let's say, $500 million.
Basil.
They flew in on a private jet. They're wearing clothes that cost more than your car. And yet, the crowd is cheering. They're screaming their love for this person. Why is that?
Because they brought the magic. They created something.
Exactly. Because intuitively, you understand the source of their standing. They created something. They took a risk. They have a distinct skill or a soul that they put on the line. There's no dissonance in their success.
Right.
You feel that the transaction, your ticket money for their performance, it was fair. They gave you something of value.
But then you have the other group, the resentment factor. And this is where it gets spicy. Who fits in here? Because this isn't just people with money.
No, it's very, very specific. This is the profile of someone who seems just like you. Maybe they were your neighbor or they went to a similar school, but they've somehow played this system.
Okay, give me an example.
Taleb points to bankers, bureaucrats who get rich while they're in office, former senators who go on to shill for controversial companies, talking heads on TV who get these massive bonuses for being wrong all the time.
He has a great phrase for it, the clean-shaven CEO with a tie.
Exactly. The corporate executive who extracts value without creating it. This is what economists call rent-seeking.
Rent-seeking. Okay, let's define that, because it sounds like you're just paying your landlord, but that's not what it is.
No, in economics, rent means extracting income from an asset or a position without adding any new value to the economy. So if I bake a pie and I sell it to you, I create value.
Right. There's a pie that didn't exist before.
But if I just stand in front of the bakery and charge you a toll to get in because I know the mayor and he gave me a special permit.
You're rent-seeking.
I am rent-seeking. I'm just moving money from your pocket to mine without making the pie any bigger.
That makes perfect sense. And Taleb captures the emotional reaction to this so well. When you see this person driving a semi-expensive car, not even a Ferrari, maybe just a really nice Mercedes, or you hear about their bonus, it triggers bitterness. He says it makes you feel smaller.
Because deep down, you know they didn't earn it through risk or through genius. They earned it by manipulating the machine. Taleb has this great line, he says, "There may be something dissonant in the spectacle of a rich slave."
A rich slave? What does he mean by that?
They're rich, but they're beholden to the system. They're interchangeable cogs who just manage to grease the wheels in their own favor.
It creates a visceral reaction. And this brings us to a really interesting and maybe a bit of a controversial example that Taleb uses to illustrate the role of risk and scars. He talks about Donald Trump. Now, before everyone reacts, we are putting politics completely aside here. This is not about policy. Taleb is looking at this purely through the lens of risk signaling.
Right. And he argues that during the campaign, Trump's detractors completely missed the point about his bankruptcies.
They really did. If you remember the 2016 election cycle, or even before that, the gotcha moment for critics was always, look, he filed for bankruptcy. He's a failed businessman. He lost $1 billion.
Yeah, the assumption was that this would destroy his credibility with the average voter.
Right. The logic was, competence means never failing. If you failed, you're not competent.
But Taleb argues it did the exact opposite. Because what does a bankruptcy signal?
That you're bad with money.
Well, in a corporate boardroom, yes. But to the lizard brain of the voter, it signals that you had skin in the game.
Nah.
It proves that you were actually in the arena. You played, you took a risk, and you take a hit. Losing your own money is respectable. It leaves scars. And scars are a signal that you're real. It separates you from the bureaucrat or the protected CEO.
I have to stop you there because that sounds completely backward to how we usually talk about competence. If I'm hiring a CEO and he tells me I lost $1 billion last time, I'm not thinking, wow, what a hero.
No.
I'm thinking I am not giving you my checkbook.
And in a standard corporate setting, purely for management, you might be right. But Taleb isn't talking about competence in managing a spreadsheet. He's talking about trustworthiness and authenticity in a chaotic world. The corporate executive usually has what we call an asymmetric payoff.
Upside without downside.
Exactly. The CEO of a major public company can manipulate the metrics. They can cut R&D, hide risks, pump up the stock price just to get their annual bonus.
Right.
Then, when the company starts to wobble 3 years later, they retire with a golden parachute and they blame the successor for the collapse. They get rich regardless of the outcome.
That is the definition of no skin in the game. They get the reward without the risk. And that, according to Taleb, is what actually drives the resentment of inequality.
Yes.
It's not the inequality itself, it's the lack of consequence for the person at the top.
Yeah.
So the Trump example, again, regardless of what you think of his policies, showed a guy who had actually faced the music of the market.
The market punished him.
Right. He didn't get a bailout, he went through the grinder.
And that resonates with people who face risks in their own lives, which connects to a broader cultural difference in how wealth is perceived, specifically the American view versus the European, or what Taleb would call the rent-seeking view.
This is the zero-sum thinking trap.
Right. In many countries, and Taleb alludes to places where the economy is dominated by patronage or, government contracts, wealth is strictly zero-sum.
Meaning, if I get a slice of the pizza, that is one less slice for you. The pizza doesn't get bigger.
Exactly. If wealth comes from regulatory capture, using the government to scam the public or block your competition, then what Peter gets is extracted from Paul. It's just theft. If I'm a billionaire because I have a monopoly on importing grain granted by the local dictator, I am stealing from you.
But in the U.S., or at least the idealized version of the U.S. economy, wealth comes from creation and destruction. Schumpeter's creative destruction.
Yes. If an entrepreneur starts a company that builds a better phone or delivers packages faster, they get rich, but they also put value in my pocket. They baked a new pie.
It's positive sum.
It's positive sum. And Taleb notes that people are generally smart enough to see the difference. If they believe you got rich by creating value, they don't feel like you took dollars out of their pocket. Odds are you put some in.
There's a fascinating story about this distinction in action, and it involves the Swiss. Now, you think of Switzerland, you think pretty egalitarian, very orderly. But they had a referendum a few years ago that really highlights this whole fan versus resentment dynamic.
This is the Swiss paradox. The proposal was to limit the salary of top managers to a set multiple of the lowest wage in the company. So basically capping CEO pay.
Right. And you'd think in a country that values equality, this would be a slam dunk.
You'd think so, but it didn't pass.
It didn't pass.
No. But the nuance is why it was proposed in the first place. The Swiss weren't trying to cap the wealth of entrepreneurs. They weren't coming for the founders. They despised the salaryman making huge money.
So the target was the professional manager, the guy in the suit.
Precisely. The target was the person collecting a massive paycheck without the personal risk of the founder. The Swiss respect the person who builds the watch company from scratch. They resent the person who is hired to manage it and pays themselves millions while laying people off. It aligns perfectly with the Taleb's theory.
And this isn't just a Swiss thing. Taleb cites research by Joan C. and Michèle Lamont regarding the American working class. And this blew my mind a little because it totally contradicts the media narrative.
Oh, completely.
We're always told that the working class is rising up against the rich.
The media often assumes the working class hates the rich as a monolith. But the studies show something different. They show that the working class often resents high-paid professionals. Journalists, doctors, administrators, professors.
Not people telling them what to do.
The people telling them what to do, the so-called elites.
So the guy in the hard hat doesn't hate Elon Musk.
Not in the same way. The rich, the super rich entrepreneurs are often seen as role models. The working class looks at a billionaire entrepreneur and says, that's the dream, he made it.
Right.
But they look at the smug professional with the steady paycheck, the tenure, and the condescending attitude, and that is where the friction lies.
It's the judgment. The billionaire is distant and abstraction. The professional is the one correcting your grammar or telling you your lifestyle is wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is a massive blind spot for what Taleb calls the intelligentsia. They think they're fighting for the people by attacking the rich, but the people are actually annoyed by the intelligentsia.
Which is a perfect segue to the structural problem. We've talked about the feeling of inequality, the emotion of it, but now we need to talk about the math of it. The difference between static and dynamic inequality. This is the hardest part of the chapter, I think, but arguably the most important.
It is the intellectual core of the argument, for sure.
So static versus dynamic, let's break this down. Static it's just a snapshot.
Yes. Static inequality is looking at the world right now at this very second, freezing time, and asking, who has the money?
Okay.
And if you look at a static snapshot, you see massive disparity. The top 1% has X amount, the bottom 50% has Y amount.
And usually the conversation just stops there. We look at the pie chart, we see a tiny slice for the poor and a huge slice for the rich, and we say, this is broken. We need to redistribute the pie slices.
But Taleb says this is a fundamental error. Because life isn't a snapshot. It's a movie. You have to look at dynamic inequality, how people move through those brackets over time.
Right.
This is where he introduces the concept of ergodicity.
Okay, here we go. Ergodicity. We promised to explain this, and I need you to walk me through this slowly because I tried to explain it to my partner over dinner, and I got lost halfway through.
It's tricky. Our brains aren't really wired for probability. But the best way to understand it is the casino analogy that Taleb uses.
I love a casino analogy. Lay it on me.
Okay, imagine we want to understand the risk of gambling. Scenario A, we take 100 different people, we give them each a stack of chips, and we send them all to a casino in Las Vegas for 1 hour.
Okay.
At the end of that hour, we freeze time and look at their finances. What do we see?
Well, the house probably won overall. But you'll have one guy, let's call him Lucky Larry, who hit the jackpot and made $1 million. You'll have a few who broke even, and you'll have a bunch who lost $100.
Right. That is a static snapshot. It's what physicists call an ensemble probability. If you average it all out, the casino looks like a stable system. Some win, some lose. The system is fine. But now, let's look at scenario B.
Okay, scenario B.
We take just one person, let's call him Cousin Eddie, and we send him to the casino for 100 days in a row. He has to play every single day.
Cousin Eddie's going to have a problem.
Cousin Eddie is going to go broke.
Right.
It's almost a certainty. In scenario A, if person #99 loses everything, it doesn't affect person #1 who won the jackpot. They're separate paths.
Right.
But in scenario B, purely by the laws of probability, eventually Eddie will hit a bad streak. And if he hits 0, if he goes bust, he can't play on day 29. He's out of the game.
Because the risk accumulates. He can't recover from a total loss. There's a point of no return.
Precisely. And here is the kicker. Taleb argues that economists and social scientists treat our economy like scenario A, a bunch of separate people in a snapshot. But for you, living your one life, it's scenario B. You have to survive over time. You are Cousin Eddie.
So, bringing this back to inequality, if the system is ergodic, it means people are moving around. Like in the casino.
Yes. In a perfectly ergodic system, if a person lived forever, they should spend a proportion of time in every economic state, roughly equal to the population breakdown.
So what does that mean in real terms?
It means you might spend, say, 60 years in the lower middle class, 10 years in the upper middle, and maybe, if you're lucky, one glorious year in the top 1%.
So everyone gets a turn at being the billionaire.
Ideally, yes. Or at least everyone have the probability of getting there. True equality isn't everyone having the same amount at the same time. It's equality in probability. No one is safe from falling, and everyone has a chance of rising.
That changes the definition of fairness completely. Fairness isn't everyone has $50,000 in their bank account right now. Fairness is the rich guy might lose it all next year, and the poor guy might win it all next year.
Exactly. Taleb argues that a society with high churn, where the rich rotate in and out, is actually very fair, even if the snapshot inequality looks high.
If the top 1% is a revolving door, that's healthy.
That's healthy. And he brings data to support this. He compares the U.S. to Europe, and the results are kind of surprising given the stereotypes we have.
How so?
We often think of Europe as the land of equality and the U.S. as the land of robber barons. But structurally, Taleb notes that in the U.S., about 10% of Americans will spend at least a year in the top 1%.
Wait, really? 1 in 10 people will hit the top 1%?
At some point in their lives, yes.
Yeah.
And more than half of all Americans will spend a year in the top 10%.
More than half? That can't be right. How?
Well, it might be the year they sell a house and realize a big capital gain, or the year they get a huge one-time bonus, or the year their small business finally takes off. But there is movement. The 1% isn't a private club, it's a hotel. People check in, they stay for a bit, and they check out.
Unless they go bust, like Cousin Eddie.
Right. Whereas in Europe, it is much more static. In France, he says something like 60% of the wealthiest families are heirs. Their wealth is sticky.
It doesn't move.
No. And in Florence, Italy, studies showed that the same handful of families have held the wealth for 5 centuries.
5 centuries? That's not a glass ceiling, that's a concrete bunker.
That is what Taleb calls an absorbing barrier. Or rather, the lack of one at the bottom and a protective one at the top. If the rich stay rich comfortably with no risk of falling,
then nobody else can get in. If the hotel is full of permanent residents, I can't check in.
Exactly. And this is the crucial point. Skin in the game prevents the system from rotting. The system needs to force the rich to risk exiting the 1% to create openings for others. If there is no downside for the top, there is no upside for the bottom.
So when we see inequality, we shouldn't ask how big is the gap. We should ask how slippery is the ladder.
That is the perfect question. And Taleb critiques big states, like France, for exactly this reason. He argues they protect large corporations and executives from dissent. They freeze social mobility in the name of stability, but what they're actually doing is creating a caste system.
Which brings us to a specific group of people who, according to Taleb, really, really struggle to understand this concept. He calls them the Mandarins.
Named after the scholar bureaucrats of Imperial China, or more specifically, the French intellectual class that Simone de Beauvoir wrote about.
Okay, so who are they today?
These are people who love to theorize, who engage in what Taleb calls false solidarity with the oppressed, but who essentially spend their lives consolidating their own privileges.
And he uses the reaction to Thomas Piketty's famous book, Capital in the 21st Century, as a case study here. Now, we have to be fair to Piketty. That book was a massive, massive bestseller. It was on every coffee table in 2014.
Oh, it was a phenomenon. And the central thesis was relatively simple, RG.
Right.
The return on capital R is historically higher than economic growth, G. Therefore, if you earn capital money, real estate, stocks, you will grow richer faster than people who just work for a living.
So the rich get richer automatically. It sounds intuitive. If I have money, the money makes money.
Right. And the Mandarin class, the intellectuals, the columnists, the tenured professors, they absolutely love this book. They embraced it as gospel because it confirmed what they already felt in their bones, that the system was rigged against labor.
But Taleb, not so much. He essentially took a sledgehammer to Piketty's math.
To put it mildly, Taleb identifies massive flaws in Piketty's work. First, the static measure problem we just discussed.
Right. The snapshot.
Piketty looks at inequality from year 1 to year 2 without checking if the people in the top tier are the same people.
Yeah.
He completely ignores the churn.
So he sees the top 1% line on the graph going up, but he doesn't see that the people inside that category are changing all the time.
Correct. But Taleb goes deeper. He claims to have mathematically disproven Piketty's methods. He even published papers in Physica A, which is a legitimate physics journal, arguing that Piketty's tools were wrong because inequality is a fat-tailed phenomenon.
Fat tails. We hear this a lot with Taleb. This is the difference between what he calls mediocristan and extremistan, right?
Yes. Let's use an analogy. Imagine we're in a stadium with 1,000 people. We want to calculate the average height. If we add the tallest man in the world to that stadium, does the average height change much?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, a fraction of an inch. Height is mediocristan. It falls within a predictable bell curve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now, imagine we want to calculate the average wealth of those 1,000 people. And we add Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates to the stadium.
The average just explodes. Suddenly, on average, everyone in the stadium is a billionaire.
That is extremistan. That is a fat tail.
Mm-hmm.
One extreme event or one person completely dominates the entire data set.
Okay.
Taleb argues that standard economics, the tools Piketty used, are built for mediocristan. They assume things smooth out and average out. But in wealth, they don't. The extreme winners skew everything, but, and this is the key, they're also subject to extreme wipeouts.
So Piketty was trying to measure a hurricane with a ruler.
That's a great way of putting it. But the real stinging critique here isn't just about the math, it's about the reaction of the intellectual class.
They didn't care about the math errors.
For the most part, they ignored them. Taleb mentions Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winner. Krugman defended Piketty, saying he's done his homework. But when confronted with the mathematical gaps, the argument shifted. They just circled the wagons.
Why? I mean, if these are smart people, why wouldn't they want the math to be right?
Taleb's argument is that they embraced Piketty not because the science was correct, but because it confirmed their bias. It fit their worldview that capitalism is unfair. And here is the kicker.
Yeah.
Taleb points out that people like Piketty and Krugman have no skin in the game.
If they are wrong, they still get paid.
Exactly. If their economic models are completely wrong and lead to a disastrous policy, well, they still have tenure. They don't face the soup kitchen risk that a bankrupt entrepreneur faces.
Wow.
They can write a book that is mathematically flawed, and their reputation might even grow because it pleases the right crowd.
So you have a class of people with no downside risk lecturing the world on inequality while completely missing the very mechanism risk that makes inequality tolerable in the first place.
It creates a massive blind spot. And it leads to a total misunderstanding of who is actually envious of whom. This brings us to the psychology of envy.
Section 5. Cobbler envies cobbler. This is one of my favorite parts because it just feels so true to life.
It's Aristotle's insight. Envy is local. You don't envy the Queen of England. You don't wake up in the morning mad that you aren't the Queen.
No, she's too far away. She's like a different species almost. It doesn't register as a real possibility.
Exactly. But who do you envy? You envy your cousin who just bought a slightly bigger house. You envy the professional peer who got the promotion you wanted. You envy the person who is just above you in the hierarchy.
Distance dilutes envy.
It does.
Yeah.
But Taleb argues there is a specific group that breaks this rule. The clerical class, the university professors, the bureaucrats. He calls it counterfactual upwards.
They look up and they see.
They compare themselves to the super rich. They feel, I am smarter than that guy. I have a PhD. I read books. Why does he have a private jet and I don't?
This is the intellectual yet idiot, or IYI, phenomenon he talks about all the time.
Yes. Taleb posits that class envy doesn't come from a truck driver in Alabama. That truck driver isn't obsessing over a billionaire in New York. The envy comes from the Ivy League-educated person in Washington, D.C., who feels the system has failed to reward their intellect sufficiently.
So they believe status should be based on credentials, not on market success.
That's the core of it. And that is a powerful reframing. It suggests that a lot of the political rhetoric about eating the rich is actually projected by the upper middle class, not the working class.
And this disconnect is made worse by how we socialize. Taleb distinguishes between vertical and horizontal socialization.
Right. In the old days, the rural past, it was vertical.
What does that mean?
Think of a wealthy landowner in the 18th century. He lived on his estate. He was surrounded by people who worked for him, dependents, locals from the village. He saw the poor every day. He spoke to them. His social life went up and down the class ladder.
But now, it's horizontal.
The rich moved to cities. They move to specific zip codes. They live in Palo Alto or the Upper East Side. They send their kids to the same 3 private schools. They race on a hedonic treadmill to keep up with each other.
And they become completely disconnected from the poor.
So for the modern intelligentsia, the poor become a construct.
Right. They're not a person, they're a statistic.
Exactly. They're a textbook reference. Taleb jokes that he has never seen a Cambridge down hanging out with Pakistani cab drivers. They theorize about the poor. They claim to speak for them, but they don't know them. They don't have a beer with them.
And this circles back to what the working class actually wants. We mentioned Michèle Lamont's study earlier.
Right. The working class isn't asking for the head of the rich businessman. They aren't asking for a communist revolution. They want, as Taleb puts it, better beer, a new dishwasher, or faster trains.
Tangible improvements to their lives.
Tangible improvements. Unless enrichment is portrayed as theft. If the narrative shifts to, that guy stole from you, if that zero-sum mentality takes over, then you get the French Revolution. Then heads roll. But structurally, the natural state isn't resentment. It's a desire for stability and a fair shake.
Now, I want to pivot to something that I think a lot of our listeners will appreciate, especially anyone who works in a corporate job or has to deal with consultants. Taleb has a section called Data, Schmata.
I love this title. It really attacks the illusion of rigor.
We live in this world where if you don't have a PowerPoint deck with 50 charts, you aren't taken seriously. If you have an intuition, you get laughed out of the room. But Taleb says this reliance on data is a trap.
He argues that a flood of data is not the same as logic. In fact, people often use data to drown out the lack of logic. They confuse noise with signal.
He uses the black swan logic here. Can we use the turkey analogy? Because that's the classic Taleb story for this.
Oh, the turkey is the perfect data scientist. Imagine you are a turkey. You are born on a farm. Every single day, the farmer comes out and feeds you.
He's a nice guy. He brings corn.
He brings corn. So as a data-driven turkey, you plot a chart. Day 1, fed. Well-being goes up. Day 100, fed. Well-being goes up. Day 900, fed. Your well-being is at an all-time high.
The data looks great.
Your statistical confidence that the farmer is your friend is 99.9%. The data proves he loves you.
And then comes the Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
And then comes the surprise. The chart hits 0. The data fooled you because you didn't understand the structure of the relationship. You didn't understand you were food.
Right.
Taleb warns that thick books loaded with charts and graphs, are often just the turkey's analysis.
He specifically calls out Steven Pinker here, right?
He does. Pinker wrote a famous book arguing that violence in the world has declined historically. And he has hundreds of charts showing wars getting smaller and fewer.
Which sounds great. I want that to be true.
It sounds great. We all want it to be true. But Taleb argues Pinker doesn't understand fat tails. Violence isn't like rain. It's like an earthquake.
Oh.
You can have 50 years of peace and then one nuclear war that kills everyone. The quiet period doesn't mean the risk is gone. It just means the risk is accumulating under the surface.
So just because the chart looks good doesn't mean the system is safe.
Exactly. And structurally, he gives a great example about wealth to prove this data schmata point. To prove someone is rich, you don't need to list every silver spoon in their pantry or appraise every rug in their house.
No, you just show the brokerage account statement with $50 million in it.
Done. Brevity is the soul of ownership. Taleb notes that traders, people with skin in the game, are very brief when they're profitable. I made money, here's the P&L. But when they are losing,
Oh, that's when the PowerPoints come out. That's when the novel gets written.
that's when they drown you in charts and theories and explanations. The market was irrational, the volatility index did this, the correlation broke down. Complexity is often amassed for failure. If you have to explain why you're right with 1,000 slides, you're probably wrong.
That is a fantastic rule of thumb for life. This brings us to the final and perhaps the most ethically charged section of this deep dive, the ethics of civil service.
This is where the rubber really meets the road for skin in the game in government, because so far we've talked about business, but what about the people making the laws?
We talked about the clean-shaven CEO, but now let's talk about the revolving door. The politician or the civil servant who uses their time in office to set themselves up for a massive payday later.
Taleb finds this deeply, deeply unethical. He mentions specific examples, like Barack Obama accepting $40 million for memoirs immediately after leaving office, or Tim Geithner.
Geithner is a prime example. He was the Treasury Secretary during the 2008 financial crisis. He was the guy deciding which banks got bailed out with our money.
With taxpayer money. And then after leaving office, he took a multi-million-dollar job at a financial institution. Taleb calls this an implicit bribe.
But it's not illegal. It's not a suitcase full of cash in a dark alley.
No, and that's why it's so insidious. It's systemic.
Yeah.
You act as a servant to an industry, say, banking or big pharma, while you're in office. You make the regulations complex, which makes your expertise more valuable, or you protect the incumbents from failure.
And then, as a thank you, they hire you later.
Exactly. It signals to the next guy in office. Play ball, and there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for you, too.
It turns public service into an investment strategy. You aren't serving the public. You are building your resume for Goldman Sachs or Monsanto.
You have no skin in the game regarding the public good. You have skin in the game regarding your future employer. It's a complete perversion of the role.
So what is the solution? Because you can't just ban people from working. People have to eat.
Taleb proposes a very strict ethical rule, and it's inspired by the Jesuits.
The Jesuits. The priests.
Yes, the Society of Jesus. Think about it. You don't become a priest to get a banking job later. It is a lifetime commitment. You sacrifice wealth for the sake of the mission.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Taleb suggests that civil servants should have to pledge never to earn more from the private sector than a set amount after leaving office.
Wow. So if you manage the Treasury, you can't go make $10 million at a hedge fund next year.
No. You can take a job, but any surplus above a modest civil servant salary would go back to the taxpayers.
But hold on, if we do that, won't we just get incompetent people running things? The argument is always, we have to pay high salaries or offer high potential to get the best and brightest to work in government.
Taleb would say that is complete nonsense. If you offer money, you get people who are driven by money. You get mercenaries. If you remove the money, who is left?
People who actually want to do the job for its own sake.
Exactly. You get people driven by honor or duty or a genuine desire to serve. You filter out the careerists. It ensures sincerity. If you take the job, it's because you want to serve, not because you want to cash in. It forces skin in the game. You are sacrificing potential earnings to serve the state.
It's a bold idea. It would completely upend Washington, D.C., London, Paris, pretty much every capital city in the world.
Which is probably why the Mandarins aren't exactly rushing to implement it. It threatens their entire business model.
So let's wrap this up. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've redefined inequality from a static number to a dynamic movie.
We've established that inequality is acceptable, even admired, when it is accompanied by risk or skin in the game. We love the entrepreneur who risks it all, or we resent the bureaucrat who plays it safe and extracts rent.
We've looked at the math of ergodicity, the need for the rich to be able to fall so that others can rise. The hotel needs to have vacancies.
And we've seen how the intellectual class often misunderstands this because they live in a world without downside risk. They focus on the snapshot, not the movie. They measure the height of the waves, but they don't understand the ocean currents.
And finally, we looked at the ethics of public service, the idea that you shouldn't be able to monetize your time in government.
It all comes back to that central filter, Does this person have skin in the game? Do they share in the risk? If they crash the ship, do they drown with us, or do they have a helicopter waiting on the roof?
It changes how you look at the news. It changes how you look at your boss. It definitely changes how you look at experts.
Speaking of experts, Taleb has one final thought on who the real expert is. It's not the journalist. It's not the bureaucrat. It's not even the scientist with the most citations.
Who is it?
It's time, the Lindy effect.
Explain that briefly as we close out. What's the Lindy effect?
The Lindy effect basically says that for non-perishable things like ideas, books, systems, the longer something has survived, the longer it is likely to continue to survive. If a book has been read for 2,000 years, it will probably be read for another 2,000. If a system has worked for 5 centuries, it's proven itself to be robust.
Time is the ultimate stress test.
Time is the only judge that matters. Ideas, systems, and people that survive over long periods of time have proven their robustness. Everything else is just noise. The only true expert is survival.
That is a powerful place to land. So here is our challenge to you, the listener. Take a look at your feed. Look at the pundits you listen to, the business leaders you admire, the politicians you follow, and ask yourself one simple question. Do they have skin in the game?
Yeah. If they are wrong, if they fail, do they pay the price, or do you?
Because if they don't pay the price, their success is just an optical illusion, and eventually the bill will come due. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you on the next one.
Stay curious.